Okay, so I'm with Ramani Narayan, who's Distinguished Professor at Michigan State University and a regular on the Bioplastics conference circuit, and often a speaker too. Ramani, one question really. It's the bioplastics industry, Bioplastics Trade Association, but does it speak with a unified voice, or is there in fact two very clear sides to what's going on here, the biodegradables and the drop-ins?
Bioplastics encompasses two totally different but very interrelated concepts. Bio-based reflects the value attributes of removing carbon or CO2 from the environment and fixing it into a polymer molecule at a rate and time scale that is in harmony with nature, right? That's the biological carbon cycle. The biodegradability, compostability has to do with end of life. What happens to the product after use when it goes into the waste stream, right? So the message coming out in conferences like this seem to be different, and they are, but they're also interrelated because, for example, take PLA. PLA is bio-based polymer. It's got a value proposition of reducing carbon footprint because it takes CO2 via photosynthesis into plants, to starch, to lactic acid, to PLA, right? That same PLA, when you dispose it in a composting environment, becomes food for the microorganisms, which then consume it and remove it from the environment. It's a perfect cycle. But there are also products like Braskem's bio-based polyethylene. So polyethylene can be made from petroleum or naphtha or now the new shale gas discoveries, or it can be made from sugarcane, right? So when you make it out of sugarcane, you go to sugar, you go to ethanol, you go to ethylene, and you go to polyethylene. The value proposition for this is very simple. For every kilogram of bio-based polyethylene you make, basic stoichiometrics, CO2 plus water gives you polyethylene in a time scale like how nature cycles it. So for every kilogram of polyethylene, you are removing 3.1 kgs of CO2 from the environment. And that is the value proposition, right? Now, that's your, what I call the intrinsic fundamental value proposition. But they also have to make sure that the growing of the sugarcane, the harvesting of it, the transportation of it, the processing of it, what is that impact on the environment? And are you creating a bigger impact, more worse impact, than say taking oil from the ground or naphtha or whatever you're using, the fossil feedstock, and making the same polyethylene?
Well, it became very clear at this particular conference that trying to define terms correctly or in a way that will suit everybody seems to be a long way off. And the life cycle analysis debates that have gone on here have basically dominated everything else. Right. I just want to put that to one side for a minute because I don't think we can solve that in 2 minutes. A more immediate issue of interest, though, is in the recycling of not necessarily the drop-ins because they go through the conventional recycling chain, but PLA, for example, which is a recyclable as well as a biodegradable material, there is no apparatus within the recycling recovery chain at the moment, volume-driven no doubt, to adequately recycle it back into something more useful than, say, a flower pot.
You have hit the nail right on the head on that one. PLA is actually a more recyclable polymer, chemically recyclable back to its monomer. So I can take PLA, let's back off. PLA is made by the polymerization of a molecule called lactide.
Yes. And
you form PLA. I can heat the PLA and go back to the lactide in essentially 95+% reversible back to monomer. You take PET or you take any other polymer, you can't do that. So technically, PLA is the most recyclable polymer, but we never talk about it. And the reason is very simple, because of the problem of you have to start a whole new collection, sorting, recovery system. And B, are you going to confuse the public with another bottle or another jug? And now they have to figure out, is this PLA, is this PET, is this bio? And that's where the problem comes.
Well, I think the public is probably massively confused anyway. But just to keep it on that recycling for a minute, are we in a bit of a danger, and with no disrespect to the recycling industry at all, but it is a bit akin to the cleaners actually telling the householder how to run his property?
The whole concept of recycling is good, but if you really look at it, at least in the US and all, PET is the most recyclable, but we are at 50%, 60%. So there's a whole bunch of plastics which cannot be easily recycled, right? And PLA falls into it. The biggest value proposition for PLA comes in the food sector. One of the biggest in packaging and food sector, which is your favorite subject, which is packaging. But the reason is very simple. Today in the US, we recover 2% of the food waste which is thrown out, which is sheer not correct, right? We put it in a landfill, and it is converted to biogas, which is methane, which is 23 times worse than CO2 as a global warming gas. So we want to divert all bio-waste, food, paper, which is readily compostable, into compost, or turn it into an anaerobic digester, recover biogas as energy, and then take the digest state and treat it into compost so that you can land apply it, right? That is a big value proposition, because suddenly now in developing countries, India and China, with half the world's population residing there, they are intrinsically, right or wrong, throw their waste, including this food waste, as a hole in the ground or just outside. Because of the nature of the environment, they go anaerobic. Therefore, they produce methane, which is 23 times bad. If they were to be able to divert it to composting or better biologically disposable infrastructures, then not only do they solve a food waste problem, then they also take care of the global warming potentials. That's one. And two, therefore, plastics and packaging, which gives tremendously valuable value to the product itself, that will also be help in diverting the organic waste, food and other, to composting. And so you have what we very famously call zero waste solutions, but they are possible with these zero waste solutions.
I'm going to hit you with one final quick question, if I might, and that is this. I mean, there's no escaping the fact that the environment is one of the most used words at this conference. Obviously, we're talking a bio-based solution, but do you think in reality that bioplastics would do better being positioned as a more cost-effective and efficient plastic rather than an environmental alternative to an oil-based material?
From a cost perspective, it's not going to make it that readily. Just like any other technology, it's going to evolve. Its potential driver is twofold. One, as we talked about, reducing the carbon footprint, and two, as we talked about, as an end of life. Unfortunately, the entire world expects bioplastics, and which is very apparent at this conference, to do everything. They must be sustainable, they must not use land, they must not make any impact, and by the way, they must fix carbon, and by the way, the end of life, they must disappear. And that's not possible. So what people need to realize is bio-based plastics, or the end-of-life biodegradable compostable plastics, have a value proposition to offer, but they're not the panacea to solve everybody's problem. All those other issues have to be dealt with by bioplastics as any other plastic.
The reality is that the oil will run out eventually, or maybe will be cut off because the Gulf of Hormuz will be blockaded, God forbid. So then this argument ceases to exist because this is the way that we will make plastic.
Right.
Can we not accelerate that kind of understanding?
So one of the additional attributes is this energy security, right? And that is a big driver. But that does not play well with the general public, for example. The other one which people don't talk about, and it seems kind of forgotten, is the whole concept of supporting agriculture. You know, one of the US presidents said, agriculture is the continuing miracle. It puts food on your table. And people generally link the materials to saying that, oh, you're going to take food away from it. In actuality, if you give the farmer the opportunity to make food products and industrial products, not fuels, then he has a better sustainable value proposition, and it will help the farmer and the environment and the country and the whole world in a better way. We need to decouple fuels from materials. And I have no idea why we couple it at all.
Ramani, always a pleasure. I suspect this debate will run and run and run, but there is no doubt that the outcome will be a bioplastics future, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.